The ZX Spectrum is an 8-bit personal home computer released in the United Kingdom in 1982 by Sinclair Research Ltd. Referred to during development as the ZX81 Colour and ZX82. The machine was launched as the ZX Spectrum by Sinclair to highlight the machine's color display, compared with the black and white of its predecessor, the ZX81. The Spectrum was ultimately released as 8 different models, ranging from the entry-level model with 16 KB RAM released in 1982 to the ZX Spectrum Plus 3 with 128 KB RAM and built-in floppy disk drive in 1987. Together they sold in excess of 5 million units worldwide. The Spectrum was among the first mainstream audience home computers in the UK, similar in significance to the Commodore 64 in the USA. The introduction of the ZX Spectrum led to a boom in companies producing software and hardware for the machine, the effects of which are still seen. Some credit it as the machine which launched the UK IT industry. Licensing deals and clones followed, and earned Clive Sinclair a knighthood for services to British industry. The Commodore 64, ORIC-1 and Atmos, BBC microcomputer and later the Amstrad CPEC range were rivals to the Spectrum in the UK market during the early 1980s. Over 24,000 software titles have been released since the Spectrum's launch, and new titles continue to be released, over 100 in 2012. In 2014, a Bluetooth keyboard modeled on the Spectrum was announced. Hardware. The Spectrum is based on a Zilog Z80A CPU running at 3.5 MHz. The original model Spectrum has 16 KB of ROM and either 16 KB or 48 KB of RAM. Hardware design was by Richard Altwasser of Sinclair Research, and the machine's outward appearance was designed by Sinclair's industrial designer Rick Dickinson. Video output is through an RF modulator and was designed for use with contemporary portable television sets. For a simple color graphic display, text can be displayed using 32 columns times 24 rows of characters from the ZX Spectrum character set or from a set provided within an application. From a palette of 15 shades, 7 colors at 2 levels of brightness each, plus black. The image resolution is 256 × 192 with the same color limitations. To conserve memory, color is stored separate from the pixel bitmap in a low-resolution, 32 × 24 grid overlay, corresponding to the character cells. In practice, this means that all pixels of an 8x8 character block share one foreground color and one background color. Altwasser received a patent for this design. An attribute consists of a foreground and a background color, a brightness level and a flashing flag, which, when set, causes the two colors to swap at regular intervals. This scheme leads to what was dubbed color clash or attribute clash, where a desired color of a specific pixel could not necessarily be accomplished. This became a distinctive feature of the Spectrum, meaning programs, particularly games, had to be designed around this limitation. Other machines available around the same time, for example the Amstrad CPC or the Commodore 64, did not suffer from this limitation. The Commodore 64 used color attributes in a similar way, but a special multicolor mode. Hardware sprites and hardware scrolling were used to avoid attribute clash. Sound output is through a beeper on the machine itself, which is capable of producing one channel with 10 octaves. Software was later available that could play 2-channel sound. The machine also includes an expansion bus edge connector and 3.5mm audio in-out ports for the connection of a cassette recorder for loading in, saving programs and data. The ear port can drive headphones and the mic port provides line-level audio out which could be amplified. Firmware. The machine's Sinclair Basic Interpreter is stored in ROM and was written by Steve Vickers on contract from Nine Tiles Limited. The Spectrum's chiclet keyboard is marked with basic keywords, so that, for example, pressing G when in programming mode would insert the basic command goto. The basic interpreter was developed from that used on the ZX81, and a ZX81 basic program can be typed into a Spectrum largely unmodified. But Spectrum Basic included many extra features making it easier to use. The ZX Spectrum character set was expanded from that of the ZX81, which did not feature lowercase letters. Spectrum Basic included extra keywords for the more advanced display and sound, and also supported multi-statement lines. The cassette interface was also much more advanced, saving and loading around 5 times faster than the ZX81, and unlike the ZX81, the Spectrum could maintain the TV display during tape storage and retrieval operations. As well as being able to save programs, the Spectrum could in addition save the contents of arrays, the contents of the screen memory, and the contents of any defined range of memory addresses. Sinclair Research Models. Pre-production designs. Rick Dickinson came up with a number of designs for the ZX82 project before the final ZX Spectrum design. A number of the keyboard legends changed during the design phase, including arc becoming circle, fore becoming ink, and back becoming paper. The Spectrum reused a number of design elements of the ZX81. The ROM code for things such as floating point calculations and expression parsing were very similar. The simple keyboard decoding and cassette interfaces were nearly identical. The central ULA integrated circuit was also somewhat similar, although it implemented the major enhancement over the ZX81, a hardware-based television raster generator that indirectly gave the new machine approximately 4 times as much processing power as the ZX81. Simply due to the Z80 now being released from this video generation task. A bug in the ULA as originally designed meant that the keyboard did not always scan correctly, and was rectified by a dead cockroach for issue 1 ZX Spectrums. ZX Spectrum 16K, 48K. The original ZX Spectrum is remembered for its rubber keyboard, diminutive size and distinctive rainbow motif. It was originally released on the 23rd of April 1982 with 16 kilobytes of RAM for £125 or with 48 kilobytes for £175. These prices were later reduced to £99 and £129, respectively. Owners of the 16 kilobytes model could purchase an internal 32 kilobytes RAM upgrade, which for early issue 1 machines consisted of a daughter board. Later issue machines required the fitting of 8 dynamic RAM chips and a few TTL chips. Users could mail their 16K Spectrums to Sinclair to be upgraded to 48 kilobytes versions. Later revisions contained 64 kilobytes of memory but were configured such that only 48 kilobytes were usable. External 32 kilobytes RAM packs that mounted in the rear expansion slot were also available from third parties. Both machines had 16 kilobytes of onboard ROM. About 60,000 issue 1 ZX Spectrums were manufactured. They can be distinguished from later models by the color of the keys. The Sinclair models all had audio line in and out, in the form of an ear and mic socket. An external tape recorder was needed to load the majority of software released. Either socket could also be connected to headphones or an amplifier as an audio output, though this would not disable the internal speaker. ZX Spectrum Plus. Planning of the ZX Spectrum Plus started in June 1984, and the machine was released in October the same year. This 48 kilobyte Spectrum introduced a new QL-style case with an injection-molded keyboard and a reset button that was basically a switch that shorted across the CPU reset capacitor. Electronically, it was identical to the previous 48 kilobytes model. It was possible to change the system boards between the original case and the Spectrum Plus case. It retailed for £179.95. A DIY conversion kit for older machines was also available. Early on, the machine outsold the rubber key model 2-1. However, some retailers reported a failure rate of up to 30%, compared with a more usual 5–6% for the older model. ZX Spectrum 128. Sinclair developed the ZX Spectrum 128 in conjunction with their Spanish distributor Investronica. Investronica had helped adapt the ZX Spectrum Plus to the Spanish market after the Spanish government introduced a special tax on all computers with 64 KB RAM or less, and a law which obliged all computers sold in Spain to support the Spanish alphabet and show messages in Spanish. The appearance of the ZX Spectrum 128 was similar to the ZX Spectrum Plus, with the exception of a large external heatsink for the internal 7805 voltage regulator added to the right-hand end of the case, replacing the internal heatsink in previous versions. New features included 128 KB RAM, 3-channel audio via the i3-8912 chip, MIDI compatibility, an RS-232 serial port, an RGB monitor port, 32 KB of ROM including an improved BASIC editor, and an external keypad. The machine was simultaneously presented for the first time and launched in September 1985 at the CIMO 85 trade show in Spain, with a price of 44,250 pesetas. Because of the large number of unsold Spectrum Plus models, Sinclair decided not to start selling in the UK until January 1986 at a price of £179.95. No external keypad was available for the UK release, although the ROM routines to use it and the port itself remained. The Z80 processor used in the Spectrum has a 16-bit address bus, which means only 64 KB of memory can be directly addressed. To facilitate the extra 80 KB of RAM, the designers used bank switching so that the new memory would be available as 8 pages of 16 KB at the top of the address space. The same technique was also used to page between the new 16 KB editor ROM and the original 16 KB basic ROM at the bottom of the address space. The new sound chip and MIDI out abilities were exposed to the basic programming language with the command play, and a new command spectrum was added to switch the machine into 48K mode, keeping the current basic program intact. To enable basic programmers to access the additional memory, a RAM disk was created where files could be stored in the additional 80 KB of RAM. The new commands took the place of 2 existing user-defined character spacers, causing compatibility problems with some basic programs. The ZX Spectrum 128 had no internal speaker, unlike its predecessors. The sound was produced from the television speaker instead. The Spanish version had the 128K logo in white, while the British one had the same logo in red. Amstrad models. ZX Spectrum Plus 2. The ZX Spectrum Plus 2 was Amstrad's first Spectrum, coming shortly after their purchase of the Spectrum range and Sinclair brand in 1986. The machine featured an all-new grey case featuring a spring-loaded keyboard, dual joystick ports, and a built-in cassette recorder dubbed the Datacorder, but was in most respects identical to the ZX Spectrum 128. The main menu screen lacked the Spectrum 128's tape test option, and the ROM was altered to account for a new 1986 Amstrad copyright message. These changes resulted in minor incompatibility problems with software that access ROM routines at certain addresses. Production costs had been reduced and the retail price dropped to £139, £149. The new keyboard did not include the basic keyword markings that were found on earlier Spectrums, except for the keywords load, code and run, which were useful for loading software. This was not a major issue, however, as the Plus 2 boasted a menu system almost identical to the ZX Spectrum 128, where one could switch between 48K basic programming with the keywords, and 128K basic programming in which all words must be typed out in full. Despite these changes, the layout remained identical to that of the 128. The ZX Spectrum Plus 2 power supply was a grey version of the ZX Spectrum Plus and 128 power supply. ZX Spectrum Plus 2A. The ZX Spectrum Plus 2A was a variant of the Spectrum Plus 3, housed a black version of the Spectrum Plus 2 case moldings. The Spectrum Plus 2A Plus 3 motherboard was designed such that it could be assembled without the floppy disk controller or associated logic, and a Plus 2 style data coder connected. Originally, Amstrad planned to introduce an additional disk interface for the Plus 2A Plus 2B called the Amstrad SI1, however this never appeared. If an external disk drive was added, the Plus 2A on the System OS menu would change to a Plus 3. The power supply of the ZX Spectrum Plus 2A used the same pinout as the Plus 3. However, the power supply purchased with the Plus 2AB had Sinclair Plus 2 written on the case. ZX Spectrum Plus 3. The ZX Spectrum Plus 3 looked similar to the Plus 2 but featured a built-in 3-inch floppy disk drive instead of the tape drive, and was in a black case. It was launched in 1987. Initially retailed for £249 and then later £199, and was the only Spectrum capable of running the CP/M operating system without additional hardware. The Plus 3 saw the addition of two more 16 KB ROMs. One was home to the second part of the reorganized 128 ROM and the other hosted the Plus 3's disk operating system. This was a modified version of Amstrad's PCWDOS, called Plus 3 DOS. These two new 16 KB ROMs and the original two 16 KB ROMs were now physically implemented together as two 32 KB chips. To be able to run CP/M, which requires RAM at the bottom of the address space, the bank switching was further improved, allowing the ROM to be paged out for another 16 KB of RAM. Such core changes brought in compatibilities. Removal of several lines on the expansion bus edge connector caused many external devices problems. Some, such as the VTX 5000 modem, could be used via the Fix-It device, dividing ROMCS into two lines, to disable both ROMs. Reading a non-existent I/O port no longer returned the last attribute, caused some games such as Arkanoid to be unplayable. Memory timing changes. Some of the RAM banks were now contented, causing high-speed color-changing effects to fail. The keypad scanning routines from the ROM were removed. Move 1 byte address in ROM. Some older 48K and a few older 128K games were incompatible with the machine. The ZX Interface 1 was incompatible due to differences in ROM and expansion connector, therefore it was not possible to connect and use the microdrive units. The ZX Spectrum Plus 3 power supply provides the same voltages as the one supplied with Plus 2AB. This power supply has the same DIN connector, so can also be used with the Plus 2AB. However, the power supply purchased with the Plus 3 had Sinclair Plus 3 written on the case. Production of the Plus 3 ceased in December 1990, believed to be in response for Amstrad relaunching their CPC range. At the time, it was estimated about 15% of ZX Spectrums sold had been Plus 3 models. Production of the Plus 2B continued, as it was believed not to be in competition with other computers in Amstrad's product range. It was eventually discontinued in 1992. ZX Spectrum Plus 2B and Plus 3B. The ZX Spectrum Plus 2B and ZX Spectrum Plus 3B were functionally similar in design to the Spectrum Plus 2A and Plus 3. the main electronic differences being simply changes to the generation of the audio output signal to resolve problems with clipping. Unlike the Plus 2A and Plus 3, the Spectrum Plus 2B and Plus 3B do not share a common motherboard. Clones. Official clones. Sinclair licensed the Spectrum design to Timex Corporation in the United States. An enhanced version of the Spectrum with better sound, graphics and other modifications was marketed in the USA by Timex as the Timex Sinclair 2068. Timex's derivatives were largely incompatible with Sinclair systems. However, some of the Timex innovations were later adopted by Sinclair Research. A case in point was the abortive Pandora portable Spectrum, whose ULA had the high-resolution video mode pioneered in the TS2068. Pandora had a flat-screen monitor and microdrives and was intended to be Sinclair's business portable. After Amstrad bought the computer business of Sinclair Research, Sir Clive retained the rights to the Pandora project, and it evolved into the Cambridge computer Z88, launched in 1987. In the UK, Spectrum peripheral vendor Miles Gordon Technology released the Sam Coupe as a potential successor with some Spectrum compatibility. However, by this point, the Commodore Amiga and Atari ST had taken hold of the market, leaving MGT in eventual receivership. Unofficial clones. Many unofficial Spectrum clones were produced, especially in the former Eastern Bloc countries, some featuring CP/M and a 5.25, 3.5 floppy disk, and South America. In the Soviet Union, ZX Spectrum clones were assembled by thousands of small startups and distributed through poster ads and street stalls. Over 50 such clone models existed. Some of them are still being produced, such as the Pentagon and ATM Turbo. In India, Decibels Electronics introduced a licensed version of the Spectrum Plus in 1986. Dubbed the DB Spectrum Plus, it did reasonably well in the Indian market and sold quite a few thousand until 1990 when the market died away. The ZX Spectrum Vega is a modern redesign of the ZX Spectrum in the form of a game console endorsed by Sir Clive Sinclair.